I sent $5,000 for my son to come to the United States. He spent it all, and he never came. I spent 5 years away from my children, working here in the United States, thinking about them every single day, saving every penny I could with one dream in my head: to bring my family back together. When my oldest son started insisting on coming to meet me here, I did what any mother would do. I put together everything I had. $5,000. Months of sacrifice, months of giving up things for myself to make sure he could get here. And then I transferred that money, and I waited, and I waited. But he never came. What I discovered after that was something I never imagined I would live through. Not because it was impossible, but because the person who did it was the last one in the world I would have expected. This is my story. And I am going to tell you everything. There are days when I wake up and just stare at the ceiling for a long time before I can bring myself to get up. It is not physical exhaustion. It is that weight a person carries when something they built with so much sacrifice falls apart right in front of them. And the worst part, it falls apart at the hands of someone you love more than your own life. I know that many people watching this video have felt something like this at some point. That feeling that you did everything right, that you sacrificed, that you gave up so much, and it still was not enough. Today, I am going to share a story that still hurts deeply to talk about, but I need to tell it, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but because maybe my story can help someone who is going through something similar. My name does not matter right now. What matters is that I am a mother, and like every mother, I did things that might seem crazy, all because of the love I have for my children. Let me start from the beginning, because this story does not begin with the $5,000. It begins much earlier than that. It begins with a decision I made 5 years ago, a decision that completely changed my life and the lives of everyone in my family. I have been separated from my children's father for many years. That separation was not easy, but it was necessary. The life we had together no longer made sense for either of us, and staying together just for the sake of the children, the way many people do, I learned that sometimes it does more harm than good. He went to live in India after we separated, went back to his roots, and moved on with his life over there. I stayed with the children, with the responsibilities, with the bills, with everything a mother carries when she is alone in the world. For a long time, I managed as best I could. I worked more than one job at a time, saved wherever possible, gave up things I wanted to make sure my children had what they needed. Any mother listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. That quiet sacrifice we make every single day without complaining, because deep down we know it is for them. It is always for them. But there came a moment when I realized that where I was, the opportunities had a ceiling. I looked around and saw that no matter how hard I worked, that ceiling existed, and I did not want a ceiling. I wanted open sky for myself and for my children. That was when I started seriously thinking about the United States. I already had a very concrete reference point here. My sister, who has been living in the United States for almost 15 years, was the first person in our family to take that step. She arrived here before me, faced everything an immigrant faces: the challenges of the language, the homesickness, the prejudice, the difficult jobs, the days when loneliness presses on your chest in a way you cannot even explain. But she stayed. She built her life here. She put down roots. When I started considering the possibility of coming, it was my sister who encouraged me. She told me it was hard, that it would not be easy, but that it was possible, and that she would be here to help me with the first steps. Knowing I would have someone from my own family here is what gave me the courage to make the leap, and I made it. 5 years ago, I arrived in the United States. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The emotion mixed with fear, that strange feeling of being in a place completely different from everything you have known your entire life, the different smells, the language you understand, but that still does not come out fluently when you try to speak it, the streets that seem too enormous, the people who walk too fast. But my sister was there waiting for me, and that made all the difference in the world. The first few months were the hardest. I will not lie about that. Adapting is a pretty word to describe a process that, in practice, is much more painful. You give up your comfort zone, your routine, your friends, the smell of your own home, everything that was familiar, and you start over from zero. With willpower, with the help of my sister, and with a lot of faith, I found my way. I started working. At first doing things I had never done before, but I did them with dignity and determination because I knew it was a beginning, not an end. I kept learning the language better, kept understanding how things work here, kept making connections, kept growing. Slowly, but growing. And while I was building my life here, my heart was split in two, because my children were far away. Any mother who has ever had to be separated from her children out of necessity knows what that is like. It is not a choice you make with a light heart. It is one of the hardest things a woman can go through. You know you are doing it for a greater good, for a better future, but that does not lessen the pain of not being able to be present in their daily lives, of missing the small moments, the ones that seem insignificant but that build a family's emotional memory. I called them every day, every single day, without exception. Sometimes the call was short because I was tired from work or they were at school, but I called. I sent messages, sent money when I could, tried to make up for the distance with everything within my reach. My oldest son, whom I will call Raphael to protect his identity in this account, was always a boy with a strong personality. From a young age, he knew what he wanted and did not rest until he got it. At first, I saw that as a quality, as determination. Over time, I started to notice that there was a very thin line between determination and stubbornness, between persistence and manipulation. But that is something we as mothers are slow to see, because love creates a kind of veil over our eyes. As Raphael got older, he started talking about coming to the United States. At first, it was scattered comments, desires he expressed every now and then. But over time, it became an obsession. Every conversation we had ended up coming back to the same subject. He wanted to come. He needed to come. This was where he belonged. This was where he could get things he could not get back home. I heard all of this with a warm heart. Of course I wanted my son close to me. 5 years is a long time to be away from your children. The longing a mother feels has no size, no way to measure it. So the idea of having him here, of being able to be present in his life again, of sharing everyday life, of course that moved me deeply. But I also knew that coming to the United States is not simple. It is not like buying a ticket and just showing up. There is bureaucracy, documentation, costs. And there is the emotional and practical cost of starting over in a different country without speaking the language fluently, without having an established support network. I knew all of that because I had been through it myself. Even so, I believed in my son's desire. I believed he wanted to build something better for his life. And when a mother believes in her child, she does the impossible. It was then that I made a decision that would change everything. I put together $5,000. $5,000. To someone on the outside, it might just sound like a number. But I want you to understand what $5,000 represents in the life of an immigrant who works hard every day, who saves every penny, who gives up her own comforts to keep that money aside. It represents months of deprivation. It represents difficult choices. It represents nights wondering whether it is worth it, whether you can hold on a little longer, whether one day all of this will make sense. That money was so much more than money. It was hope. It was the dream of having my son by my side. It was the chance to rebuild something that the distance had fragmented. And I sent it. But what happened afterward was something I never could have imagined, not even in my worst nightmares. When I transferred that money, I remember staring at my phone screen for a long time after confirming the transaction. There was a mix of feelings that is hard to put into words. There was relief, because I was finally doing something concrete to bring my son closer to me. There was anxiety, because I knew that amount represented so much and I did not want anything to go wrong. And there was that anticipatory joy, you know. The kind you feel when you are waiting for something good that has not arrived yet, but that you can almost already smell in the air. I was already imagining everything. What it would be like to receive him at the airport, to hug him after so much time, to show him what my life here looked like, to introduce him to my sister whom he knew but had also been distant from for years. I imagined us having dinner together, talking, making up for lost time. I imagined helping him find a job, learn to get around here, build the future he always said he wanted. They were beautiful dreams, and I held on to them with everything I had. Raphael knew exactly what to do with that money. At least that is what he said. We had talked a lot before I made the transfer. He had explained the steps to me, the documents he needed to get, the fees he needed to pay, the agencies he was going to contact to help with the process. He spoke with a confidence that put me at ease. He spoke like someone who had done their research, who knew what they were doing, who had a plan. And I, being a mother, being someone who loved him and wanted to believe, believed. The first few days after the transfer were full of expectation. I would ask how things were going, and he would update me. He said he was sorting out the documentation, that he had gone to such and such place, that he had spoken to such and such person, that everything was on track. Each message from him was like a small relief for my heart. I would take a deep breath and think, it is happening. My son is coming. But then the weeks went by, and the stories started changing. At first it was bureaucratic delays, the kind of thing you know exists. So I did not find it strange. A document that took time to come through, an agency that asked for one more paper, a deadline that got extended. I was patient because I knew these things happen. I myself had faced difficulties when I came here, so I understood that the process was not linear. But then came the stories that started not adding up. Once he told me he had missed a deadline because the office where he needed to sort out part of the process had closed early that day. Another time, he said there had been a problem with one of the documents and that he would need more time to sort it out. Then came a story about someone he had hired to help with the process who had disappeared without a word. I heard all of this and tried to believe it. I tried to find the logic in each story, tried to understand how each one fit into the previous one. But there was something that started bothering me deep in my stomach. That feeling you try to ignore because you do not want to believe what it is suggesting. I started asking more specific questions. I wanted to know names of places, addresses, documents he had in hand. And that is when the answers started getting vague, way too vague. When I pushed for details, he deflected. When I asked for some kind of proof, there was always a reason why he did not have it. The file would not open. His phone had had a problem. He would send it later. Later never came. I remember one specific night when I could not sleep. I lay in the darkness of my room staring at the ceiling, and for the first time I allowed myself to think what I had been avoiding thinking since the very beginning. Was my son lying to me? Was all of this a lie? I pushed that thought away. I felt guilty just for having it. How could I suspect my own son? He was my blood, my child. I had known him since before he was born. I knew who he was. But the truth is that we do not always know the people we love the way we think we do. And that is especially true when distance settles in for years and children grow up away from our eyes. I decided to call him instead of just sending messages. I wanted to hear his voice, wanted to get a sense of whether everything was all right. The call rang several times before he answered, and when he did, his voice had a different tone. It was not the tone of someone in the middle of an exhausting bureaucratic process. It was the tone of someone who knew that the conversation about to happen was not going to be easy. I asked directly, "How are things going? When do you think you will be able to travel?" He gave an evasive answer, said things were complicated, that the process had hit another obstacle, that he needed more time. And then I asked something I had never asked so directly before. How much of the money is still available? The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but to me, it felt like an eternity. He said he had spent most of it on fees and documents. I asked him to break it down for me, to tell me exactly what each amount had been spent on. And that is when the stories started contradicting each other in a way that was impossible to ignore. Amounts that did not match, dates that made no sense, services he claimed to have hired that I had never heard of before. I pulled on the thread slowly, with that pain only a mother knows. The pain of discovering something that is going to break your heart, but that you need to know. By the end of that conversation, I had understood enough to realize that something was very wrong. In the days that followed, I went to my sister. She is the person who knows me better than anyone here, who has been my safe harbor since I arrived. I told her everything, every detail, every story he had given me, every evasive answer, every contradiction. She listened with patience and without judgment. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in that calm way she has, "You need to find out the truth, not for the money, for your son." And she was right. It was not about the money. $5,000 hurts a lot to lose, especially when you know how hard you worked to put it together. But what hurt more was the possibility that my son My oldest son, the one I had carried in my heart for so long, had looked me in the eyes, through a video call, and lied to me. I reached out to people I knew who still lived near where Raphael was. Carefully, without raising suspicions, I started piecing information together. And then the truth began to emerge. Raphael had not tried to come to the United States. Not really. He had made the initial move, had talked to a few people, maybe even collected a document here or there. But the real process, the serious process that would have actually brought him here, had never genuinely taken place. And the money? The money had gone in other directions he had never told me about, that I pieced together gradually through the people who helped me understand what had happened. When I finally put all the pieces together and the full picture came into focus in front of me, I had to sit down. Literally sit down, because my legs could no longer hold me up. I had been deceived by my son, not by a stranger, not by someone I barely knew, by my son, by that boy I had raised, that I had loved unconditionally, that I had sacrificed so much to try to bring closer to me. The pain I felt in that moment has no name. It is not anger, not disappointment, not sadness. It is all of those things at once multiplied by something that goes far beyond any word I could use here. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part of everything, was realizing that this was only the first layer of a much more painful understanding that was still to come. Because discovering that your son lied to you is one thing. Understanding why is something else entirely. After the truth landed on me like that, I spent a few days in a state I am not quite sure how to describe. It was not paralysis, because I kept functioning. I went to work, came back, did my things. But it was as if I were doing everything on autopilot, as if a part of me had switched off in order to process what had happened without completely falling apart. My sister kept an eye on me during that period. She did not smother me with questions, did not hover over me constantly, but I knew she was present. Sometimes she would show up with food, sometimes she would just sit beside me, and we would stay in silence. That kind of presence, the kind that does not need words, is the most valuable kind there is, and I am grateful to this day for having had that. But on the inside, the process was happening. I was trying to understand, not just what had happened, but why. Because when you discover you have been deceived by your own son, the first question that comes is not about the money. It is about where you went wrong. It is about what happened to that child you raised, that you loved, that you tried to teach the right values. I kept revisiting memories. I went all the way back to Raphael's childhood, trying to find some sign that I might have overlooked. And when you do that, when you search the past through the eyes of the present, you start seeing things that were previously hidden behind the curtain of love. Raphael was always the type of person who found the path of least resistance. From a young age, when he wanted something, he looked for the easiest way to get it. Sometimes that showed up as creativity, as that ability to solve problems in unconventional ways that I actually admired in him. But other times, looking back now with more clarity, I could see that this search for the easy path had crossed lines that should not have been crossed. There were situations at school that I had minimized, small dishonestities that I had let go because every teenager tests limits, right? There were stories with friends that did not quite add up, but that I had accepted because he was my son and I wanted to believe him. There were requests for money over the years that always came with plausible justifications, but that, taken together, formed a pattern I had not wanted to see. When you are inside it, it is impossible to see the pattern. You are so close, so emotionally involved, that each thing seems isolated. It is only when you step back, or when something too big happens and forces you to look with different eyes, that the pattern appears in its entirety. And I was looking now, with eyes that hurt from seeing so much. But I was still missing one piece of the equation. I needed to talk to him, not by message, not by a quick phone call. I needed a real conversation, the kind where you look each other in the eyes, even if it is through a screen, and say what needs to be said. I scheduled a video call with him. I spent the night before barely sleeping, thinking about what I was going to say, how I was going to say it, trying to prepare myself emotionally for a conversation I knew was going to be very difficult. I did not want to break down during the call. I needed to be strong, not out of pride, but because I wanted him to actually hear me. and people who are crying are often unable to communicate what they need to communicate with the necessary clarity. When the screen lit up and my son's face appeared, I felt that tightening in my chest that only happens when you love someone deeply and are angry and missing them at the same time. He looked a little nervous. He knew this was not an ordinary call. I did not beat around the bush. I told him I knew, that I had found out what had happened with the money, that I knew he had not really tried to come. The silence that followed lasted long enough to confirm everything I needed to know. Then came the reaction I honestly had not expected. I was bracing for denial, more stories, more elaborate justifications. But what came was different. He started talking, slowly, in a low voice, and what came out of his mouth left me without ground beneath my feet in a way that was completely different from how the discovery of the betrayal had left me. He told me he had never wanted to come to the United States. It was not his dream. It was what he thought I wanted to hear. It was what he knew moved me, what made me happy, what made me feel like I was not completely separated from my children. And he had used that. He had used my love, my longing, my desire to have him close, as leverage to get what he wanted. And what he wanted was the money, not to come here, to deal with things he had never told me about. Debts he had accumulated, situations he had gotten himself into through bad decisions he had made, financial holes he did not know how to fill, and that, when the opportunity came along, he decided to fill with my money, with my sacrifice, with the months I had saved penny by penny thinking of him. Hearing that was like taking a punch in slow motion. You see the blow coming, but you cannot get out of the way, and when it lands, the pain is unlike anything you have felt before. I stayed quiet for a while after he finished talking. I needed that silence. It was not angry silence. It was not punishment. It was the silence of someone trying to reorganize everything they knew about a situation that had just completely changed shape. And then I asked him, in the calmest voice I could manage, "Why did you not just ask me for help directly? Why did you not tell me you were in trouble? Why did you have to lie to me?" His answer broke me in a different way. He said he was ashamed, that he knew I worked so hard, that I had sacrificed so much, that I had expectations of him, and he was afraid of disappointing me. So instead of disappointing me with the truth, he built a lie that, at least for a while, kept me happy. And then I understood something that is far more complex than simply being deceived. The distance had done something to our relationship that I had not noticed while it was happening. When you are away from your children for years, you inevitably build a version of them in your head, a version based on memories from when you were together, updated by the conversations you have, but filtered through everything you want to believe. And the children, on the other hand, feel the weight of the expectations that version carries. Raphael no longer saw me as the present mother, the one with whom he could be imperfect without fear. He saw me as someone distant that he needed to impress, someone he needed to appear okay in front of, so as not to add more worry to a life he imagined was already hard enough out here. That does not justify what he did. It absolutely does not justify it. $5,000 do not disappear because of an emotional explanation. The lie does not undo itself because there is a reason behind it. And I needed him to understand that too. I told him, still with that calm that was costing me so much to maintain, that what he had done had real consequences. Not only financial ones. That money was the representation of months of my life, of choices I had made, of deprivations I had accepted. And he had taken that from me without giving me the chance to decide whether I wanted to help him in the way he truly needed. Because if he had come to me with the truth, if he had told me he had debts, that he needed help, that he was in a difficult situation, I do not know exactly what I would have done, but I know I would have tried to help somehow, because I am a mother. And mothers help, even when it hurts, even when it is hard, even when it means giving up more. What he took from me was not just the money, it was the choice, it was the trust, it was the possibility of having been able to help him for real, in the right way, at the right time. That conversation went on for a long time. I am not going to detail every part of it here, because there are things that belong only to me and to him. But I can say it was one of the most difficult and at the same time most important conversations I have ever had in my life. When the call ended, I went to my room, closed the door, and finally let the tears come. That deep crying that starts from the stomach, that shakes your whole body, that has nothing delicate about it. The crying of someone who has held too much for too long and finally lets it go. But alongside the pain, there was something else. There was clarity. I knew that could not be the end of the story. Not the story with my son, and not my own story here. I had come too far, had been through too many hard things to let that episode break me in some irreparable way. The question now was, what was I going to do with all of this? After that night when I cried until there were no tears left, I woke up the next day with that strange feeling of someone who has been through a storm and is looking up at a sky that is still cloudy, trying to figure out whether it has passed or whether there is still more to come. My body was heavy, my eyes were swollen, but there was something different inside me. It was not strength, not yet. It was more like a quiet decision that had formed while I slept. The decision not to let any of this destroy me. I got up, made my coffee, sat by the window, and spent some time just looking at the street. Life out there was continuing normally. People going to work, cars passing by, the world turning at its own pace without caring about what I had been through in the last few weeks. And there is something in that indifference of the world that in a moment of pain is almost comforting, because it reminds you that life goes on, that the sun rises even on the days when you do not want it to. I called my sister that morning. I told her everything that had happened on the video call with Raphael, every part that I had kept to myself until then. She listened from beginning to end without interrupting me. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said something that has stayed with me to this day. She said, "You did not fail as a mother. You loved as a mother." Those are two different things. I needed to hear that. Because one of the cruelest things we do to ourselves after a betrayal like that is turn the other person's guilt into our own. We start reviewing every decision, every choice, every moment where we might have done something differently, and we build a case against ourselves that has no end. And that is a trap, a dangerous trap. The truth is that I did what any mother who loves does. I believed in my son. I invested in his future. I placed the desire to have him close above my own financial security. That is not naivety. That is love. And love is not weakness, even when it is used against you. But love is also not the absence of consequences. In the weeks that followed, I had to make some difficult decisions about how I was going to handle things with Raphael going forward. And I want to be honest here, because I know there are many people watching who might be going through something similar and who want to know how you actually do this in practice. The first thing I decided was that I was not going to cut my son out of my life. I know many people might do that, and I do not judge anyone who does. Every situation is unique, every relationship has its own history, and there is no right answer to this kind of thing. But for me, cutting Raphael off completely was not an option that made sense. Not because what he did was not serious, because it was, but because I would need to be able to look at myself 20 years from now and know that I tried, that I did not give up. What I decided to cut off was resources without accountability. That was the most concrete and most important change I made. From that point on, any kind of financial help I offered Raphael, if I offered any at all, would be conditional on complete transparency. No vague stories, no promises hanging in the air, no money that goes to one place and shows up somewhere else. If he needed help, I would need to understand exactly what it was about, verify what could be verified, and decide with my mind, not just my emotions. That sounds simple to say, but in practice, it is much harder. Because when your son calls and his voice has that tone you have known since he was a baby, when he says he is struggling, every motherly instinct you have screams that you need to help right now, no questions, no conditions. Suppressing that instinct and replacing it with caution is work that demands constant awareness. I started doing that. Not perfectly, because there is no perfection in situations like this, but I started. The second thing I did was seek support. Not in the formal sense of therapy, although I would not discourage that for anyone, but in the sense of not carrying it all alone. I talked to my sister. I talked to a very close friend I had made here over those 5 years, a woman who is also an immigrant, who also has children far away, who also knows firsthand the weight of this kind of life. Talking about what happened, putting it into words, was an essential part of the healing process. There is something that happens when you hold a very great pain inside yourself. It ferments. It grows in the dark. It takes on a size that has nothing to do with the actual size of the problem. Because without light and air, things become distorted. When you speak, when you bring it out into the open, the pain is still there, but it returns to its real size. And then it becomes more possible to look at it and decide what to do. The third thing, and perhaps the hardest, was to forgive. I want to talk about this very carefully because I know the word forgiveness is often used in a way that places an unfair burden on the person who was hurt. So let me explain what forgiving meant for me in this situation. Forgiving Raphael did not mean saying that what he did was okay. It was not. Forgiving did not mean pretending it never happened, or acting as if $5,000 were insignificant, or pretending the trust was still intact. None of that. Forgiving meant deciding that I was not going to let that specific pain define me, that I was not going to wake up every day carrying that episode as if it were the whole story, as if it erased the 20-something years of love that existed before it and the ones that could come after, that I was not going to let what he did turn me into a bitter, distrustful, closed-off person. That was a choice I made for myself, not for him, for me, and it was the most liberating choice I could have made. Over time, the relationship with Raphael began to rebuild itself, slowly, carefully, with an honesty that had not existed between us before. Because one of the things that whole situation ended up forcing was a real conversation, the first in a long time, about who we each truly were. Not the idealized version I had of him, not the perfect son he tried to perform for me. The real versions, imperfect, complicated. He told me things I did not know, about what life had been like for him after I left, about the difficulties he had faced and kept to himself, about the mistakes he had made and tried to handle alone because he did not want to worry me. I heard all of that with pain, because I loved my son, and it hurt to know he had been through hard things without telling me. But I also heard it with a new understanding, because I began to see that the distance had created a communication barrier far deeper than I had realized. I am not saying any of that justifies what he did. I have said it before, and I will say it again. It does not justify it. But understanding is not the same as justifying. Understanding is what allows you to do something constructive with what happened, instead of staying trapped in a cycle of pain with no way out. And I did not want to stay trapped. I had come too far for that. 5 years in the United States, 5 years away from my family, away from my roots, away from everything that was familiar. 5 years building a life from zero in a land that was not mine, in a language I had to learn through living it, in a system I had to figure out step by step. 5 years of sacrifice that were not small and were not easy. I did not come all this way to be destroyed by a betrayal, no matter how painful it was. I came here to build something, and building is exactly what I continue to do. The money I lost, the $5,000 I put together with so much effort, did not come back. That is the concrete reality, and I am not going to pretend it does not hurt. It still hurts. It will probably continue to hurt for a while, because that amount represented so much more than numbers on a screen. But I choose not to let the loss of that money become bigger than the lesson it brought me. And the lesson was hard, but it was real. Love is not the same as believing everything the people you love tell you. Real love includes boundaries. It includes honesty, even when honesty hurts. It includes the courage to ask the hard questions before acting, even when you are afraid of the answer. Love that has no structure, no foundation, that operates only in the territory of emotion with no practical criteria, that kind of love can be taken advantage of. And that is not the fault of the person who loves, but it is a reality we need to learn to navigate. Today, I look at this story with a perspective that only time and inner work can give you. I see a woman who loved too much and who learned to love more wisely, not less, never less, but in a way that also protects itself, that also respects itself, that also recognizes that taking care of yourself is not selfishness, it is survival. If you are watching this and you identify with any part of this story, I want you to know one thing. You are not alone. Immigrants who send money to family and are let down. Mothers who love and are betrayed through that love. Women who build lives in distant places and carry the guilt of that distance as if it were a crime. You are not alone. This story is more common than any of us likes to admit. And going through something like this does not make you foolish. It does not make you weak. It makes you someone who loved. And loving, even when it hurts, even when it costs more than you expected, is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. I am still here, still working, still building, still rebuilding myself when necessary, still being a mother, with all the complications and beauty that brings. And still believing that difficult stories, when we have the courage to tell them, can become bridges for other people who are going through the same thing and who need to know there is a way through to the other side. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.